I guess what I'd like to do now before we set off is take an opportunity to introduce the full board or allow them to introduce themselves before we keep going. So what I'm going to propose to do is to sort of call out a name and ask you to please introduce yourself and tell everyone here what it is you do at NHS Orkney. So surprise, surprise, I'm going to start with Laura Scaife-Knight.
Evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Laura Scaife-Knight, Chief Executive.
Thanks very much. And Ryan McLaughlin?
Sorry, technical difficulties immediately, always a good way to start. I'm Ryan McLaughlin. I'm the Employee Director at NHS Orkney. That role is elected by trade unions and professional organisations to act as the voice of trade unions and staff side on the board.
Thanks, Ryan. Mark Doyle?
Good evening all, thank you for attending. I'm Mark Doyle, the Director of Finance.
Fantastic. And I'm just looking down at my list of people that are here. Joanna, please, Joanna Kenny?
Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Kenny. I'm a non-executive director of the board.
Thanks very much. Monique?
Hi all, I'm Monique Sternberg. I'm one of the consultants in Ops and Gynae, but also the interim deputy medical director.
Thanks very much. Rona?
Evening everyone, I'm Rona Gold and I'm a non-executive director on the board.
Thank you. Stephen Brown?
Evening folks, I'm Stephen Brown. I'm the Chief Officer for the Integration Joint Board in Orkney.
Thank you. And oh my gosh, Linda, please. Sorry, I'm looking at the list.
Good evening all, I'm Linda McGovern. I am the Interim Director of People and Culture and I'm here until the new year, until the permanent person arrives to start employment.
Fantastic. Stephen Johnston?
Good evening everyone, my name is Stephen Johnston. I am Chair of the Area Clinical Forum, so I am Chair of the group of clinicians that we come together to provide clinical advice to the board on a variety of matters, and I'm also Chair of our clinical governance group.
Thanks very much. Samantha?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Sam Thomas. I'm the Director of Nursing, Midwifery and Allied Health Professionals and the Chief Officer for Acute Services here in NHS Orkney.
That's brilliant. Now, Louise.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Louise Wilson. I'm the Director of Public Health.
Thank you all. Can I just make sure that I've gotten everyone? I do apologize. I should have had a tick list ready and it's the only thing I didn't do. Okay. My name's Megan McEwen and I'm the board chair. Thank you all for coming. So if we start, I guess one of the things we're going to have to be really careful about today is whilst this annual review is looking back at the financial year of 2022 and 2023, NHS Orkney is in a really exciting period of change and improvement. And so it's really important to us also to highlight what we're doing around some of the really key areas and key priorities that are important to us. So we're just going to try and be as much as we can, keeping a foot in both the last year camp, but also trying to ensure that we're highlighting what we are doing to be a continuous improvement organization in the next year. So going back to those key fundamental jigsaw pieces of an annual review, one of them is an annual report from the Area Partnership Forum. And I'm going to turn it over now to our Employee Director, Ryan McLaughlin, to take us through that session and the report that was written.
Thanks, Megan. Just bear with me when I pull that up. So I'm hoping everyone has had a chance to read the report on the 2022-23 retrospective year for the Area Partnership Forum. We touched upon a number of different areas that we've been working on, specifically focusing on what NHS Scotland has called the staff governance standards, which are enshrined in what NHS Scotland does and are aimed at providing a wholesome staff experience. In terms of what we did for the last year, the Area Partnership Forum has had a significant growth in attendance on from staff side unions. We've increased the amount of representation we have from different staff groups. I'm pleased to say that we now have colleagues from the Royal College of Midwifery and the British Medical Association, which is something that we haven't had previously. We've also introduced a number of different Sorry, I'm waffling. So our work streams for this year have been looking at improving a number of different areas. We have had, as reported in the media, a significant improvement in our health and safety function going forward. We've recruited successfully to a large health and safety team within NHS Orkney and significantly improved our resources and capability there, as well as improving our staff side representation as trade unions in the participation in the health and safety function of our organisation. We're looking at significantly improving our attendance at statutory mandatory training, and we're hopefully in a position to take forward with changing. Sorry, what can I say? Nervous public speaker. We're hopefully in a position to take forward significant improvements to our staff health and safety experience going forward, as well as improving our staff's well-being. One thing we highlighted in our annual review meeting earlier today was that we have significant improvement to make in managing our sickness absence as an organisation. And one thing that the Area Partnership Forum has decided to dedicate its time to going forward is looking at our model of retaining staff. We're going to make sure that staff are central to that agenda, and one of the key areas that we've chosen to focus on going forward is employee well-being as an organisation. That's one of our 5 key areas of focus. So the Area Partnership Forum will be making that central to our agenda going forward. We're also looking at improving our engagement model as a forum. The Area Partnership Forum should act as one of the primary vehicles for staff engagement with the board and the wider staff. It's something that we've done historically reasonably well, but it's going to be a focus going forward to ensure that, bearing in mind things like our financial position as a board, we make sure that staff are central to the discussions as we decide to prioritize certain resources, and making sure that we capture any risk as we go forward and act on it in a timely manner. Laura, anything you would add to that?
Thanks, Ryan. Just a couple of points I would add, or perhaps emphasise as well, if I may. Thank you. So I think, as Ryan has just described, we can evidence real progress over the last year, and we're really proud of those achievements as we discussed as a group today. I think if we look to the year we're in now, we have set for the first time, in response to staff feedback, 5 really clear organisational priorities, and I think we've got real traction in each of these areas now. So firstly, investing significantly in staff health and wellbeing. Secondly, valuing, rewarding and recognising our staff, and we've got a big programme of work around that. Thirdly, listening to and acting on staff feedback, and not just doing that but closing the loop, and I think again we've got some way to go there, but we're making good progress. The 4th area is better involving staff in our decision making, and then last but by no means least, living our values. So visible and compassionate leadership and leading with kindness is front and centre of my agenda, and something that we're trying to spread across the organisation. I think as we look to the year ahead, just finally for me, I think as an Area Partnership Forum, we've really narrowed our priorities, which means we can do less things better. So if we look at the big organisational priorities as a group, we are working together, moving forward on recruitment and retention, and making sure we improve appraisal rates, recognising having good quality appraisals is really important in terms of how staff feel about working here, and also working together, recognising the financial challenge that we have ahead of us. And just on that matter, finally, for me, I really just want our local community to know that we are carefully balancing and really delicately balancing a number of areas. Quality and safety and patient safety and quality of care, top of the agenda first and foremost. Secondly, staff wellbeing. And thirdly, living within our means and our finances. And I really just want to reinforce that we will be really thoughtful and deliberate in how we respond to that range of challenges. And I think that will be a theme that we'll come back to throughout the course of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was really useful, and actually I think it does show just how powerful it is, that engagement forum. So that's the Area Partnership Forum. On my own screen, I've frozen. Oh no, I've unfrozen. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness. Okay, so the next bit of the jigsaw puzzle of an annual review is the Area Clinical Forum Chair's reflections and feedback. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Johnston to talk us through that, please.
Thanks very much. So the Area Clinical Forum put together this report, which we discussed further this afternoon. That it outlines the areas that we were most concerned about, most proud of, our main themes over the course of the last year or so. And then what we did this afternoon was look at that, but also look at where we might want to go in the year ahead. So you've got in front of you the bit about the year past. So I'll run through that briefly, and then I'll give you a rundown of what we discussed this afternoon too. So the first and main item, and that's top of the list very deliberately, is clinical engagement. It's something we've always grappled with a bit, getting our very dedicated clinicians away from the coalface to come and give us some advice or some support and some help. They want to be facing their patients and doing their best for them, but there needs to be a space for them to come out and provide advice and help us change the services in the way that we need to change them. Not to mention the fact that the Area Clinical Forum is a statutory part of providing NHS services, and it's within the regulations in Scotland. So we need to have groups advising the board, providing them with clinical advice. And the important part of our group is that it's multidisciplinary clinical advice. It's not just a doctor or a nurse telling them what to do. It's a wide range of professional clinical staff that provide the board with some advice. So clinical engagement is so important. We struggle with that in terms of being able to get people around the table at meetings. And then when we do have people around the table at meetings, we don't always have the right topics on our agenda and things like that. We need to maybe think about tightening that up a little bit. There are some pieces of work being done that are going to help us with clinical engagement going forward. The board as a whole are doing a piece of development work alongside the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, and one sub part of that will be to try and improve clinical engagement, one of the projects within that area. We don't have an area pharmaceutical committee, and we don't have an area medical committee. So what that means is our pharmacists and our doctors don't have the ideal avenue to provide clinical advice. That said, there is a GP group and there is a hospital doctors group. So they all have an opportunity that comes directly to the Area Clinical Forum, but it's just having that opportunity to come together across primary and secondary care isn't there at the moment. There have been positive aspects over the last year or so in terms of clinical engagement. The Area Clinical Forum hosted an event to help people with chairing skills, so chairing meetings and things that people that come through a clinical background may not have the experience in these areas. So we provided that. We've been looking at safe staffing, and in particular the time to lead element of that, to see if we can build leaders through our organisation and using safe staffing as a tool. So that's safe staffing is in legislation now, coming into play on the 1st of April. So preparing towards that. That's all in there around the clinical engagement. And then we also, over the last year, we've had a look at our clinical accommodation and the use of our clinical support building. And we've had a look at some of the e-health matters, both the positive elements of that, like HEPMA, which was a pharmacy piece of software that helped us basically provide care better instead of pieces of paper on the wards that looked after drugs. It's now an electronic system, and it's far easier to now audit and check for errors and stop errors in the first place, etc. So HEPMA has been a resounding success. There have been other pressures in areas, ways of recording electronic records that we're using. For example, our health visitors are using a system called Paris that hasn't been serving them as well as it could. And so we've been trying to make changes there and provide some advice on how that might be improved in the future, for example. There have been elements that we've looked at the Area Clinical Forum around cost of living and the impact that that's having on the clinical care that we provide in Orkney. We've looked at some of the frailty work that's been really positive in Orkney, and the Area Clinical Forum contributed to the annual delivery plan and the 3-year medium-term plan that NHS Orkney has produced for Scottish Government. Some concern around the children's services, because there's been some vacancies due to difficulty recruiting our children's services manager for health. And the Area Clinical Forum produced its first annual report this year, which was something we hadn't done before, but we're just trying to raise our profile a little bit. We meet every 2 months, and in the months in between, we hold what we call development sessions. We need to reframe that, retitle that, but it's basically multidisciplinary sessions that are open to all clinical staff. We pick a topic, a hot topic that we might attract people in, and something that's going on within the organisation that we're looking for clinical advice on. Unfortunately, over the last year or so, these have been less well attended. I don't know whether because of the additional pressures post-COVID and with everything going on, it may well be that staff don't have as much time to attend some of these things. So they've not been as well attended recently, but we did have, in the last year or so, we've had one on achieving financial balance. We've had one on clinical accommodation and another around clinical engagement. So we have been trying to draw our staff together on these areas. So that's the sort of the looking back bit. In terms of this afternoon's session, we were all in agreement that we need to sort of look forward and try and do something more around the getting better engagement, targeting specific areas for such as the area pharmaceutical committee and the area medical committee, but also just in the widest sense, trying to get people involved in providing advice across their advisory committees. I've spoken already about the Royal College work to try and improve clinical engagement again. We spoke a little bit about ensuring that actions that were raised to the board, we track these now, we make sure we keep an eye on them and feed them back to the groups that raised them in the first place, so they have that loop back, they have that feedback. But it's just about ensuring that those issues where they do come to the board, that there's a meaningful response back on that. As well as that, I think we're looking at the Scottish Government, when they asked us to put together this annual review, gave us a list of headings on areas that they wanted us to feed back to them on. But those headings, in many of the cases, were news to us. So I think there needs to be a bit of communication back and forth between Scottish Government to allow us to know what it is they want the Area Clinical Forum to focus on, but at the same time allowing us the flexibility to do what we need to do as an island board Area Clinical Forum. We still have that flexibility, that individual clinicians still have that individual flexibility to speak up when there's problems that they're encountering. So we're not exclusively focused on these areas, but we have agreed a shift to make sure that, and we had a really good discussion this afternoon giving examples of where we might look into realistic and value-based medicine, patient safety, health inequalities, etc. And there was some concern about creating some duplication when we do this, but as long as we are clear about the purpose of it coming to the Area Clinical Forum, i.e. seeking clinical advice on the matter, looking for those unintended consequences when you look at it from a multidisciplinary point of view, dealing with a concern or shaping or advising on a development, it's going to be meaningful and helpful. So I'm nearly there. There's a little bit around making sure that our independent contractors are involved. So that's across, and many of these things, in fact, just about all of them are shared with my ACF colleagues elsewhere in Scotland. But independent contractors are difficult because they're not employed by the NHS, so it's not as easy to pull them out of their day-to-day roles. And these, when I speak about independent contractors, I'm meaning self-employed pharmacists, GPs, optometrists, dentists that work out in our high street in inverted commas. So it's about recognising the value that they have to contribute as well and enabling that contribution. So I think the Area Clinical Forum is heading towards a refresh of its terms of reference and membership. And I hope that we would be in a better position in the year forward. So thank you very much for allowing me to take probably a little bit longer than I intended.
Thank you, Stephen. That was actually a really welcome contribution. And I suppose what I'd like to take an opportunity to do is acknowledge that 2022 and 2023, and even the year we're in now, is that word recovery is a really interesting one. And there is a little bit about recovering our connection to each other and to the parts of our system that had to stop in response to the pandemic. And some of that is things like development sessions and making time for this. We had all of us gotten out of the way of it. And it is about making sure that we are prioritizing the things that add value to our patients, but also to our staff, and make coming to work exciting, inspirational, and a development opportunity. So that I would also like to acknowledge that we are still in that period of recovery and almost reassembling a system that some bits of it have just been forgotten. We've gotten out of the way of. So thank you for both of you for that. You're going to hear from me for a little bit now while I talk through the patient and carer session, which is another jigsaw part of the annual review. And normally this is a part of the jigsaw that only comes into play when there's a minister that is attending the review. But I actually felt, given what I've just said, and also one of our priorities to reconnect with people, that I wanted to take this opportunity to have a session. And I think I need to say now that I wouldn't have been able to have the incredible, powerful, and important session I had without the incredible work of two individuals, and those are Julie Tate, who's our patient experience officer, and Maureen Swanee as well, who does many things and wears many hats, and they just absolutely ensured that that was a really successful session. So I want to acknowledge their massive contributions and thank them for allowing me to have a great conversation. So I took a run at a patient experience or a patient feedback session, and unfortunately Storm Babette had different ideas, and so we had to reschedule, and it was only eventually held last week. But I was really grateful. There was a very good turnout of individuals who had some great stories of accessing our services, and also gave me some real insight into what matters to them. So the session was really free flowing around those key questions: what matters to you, some experience of your services, and any key areas for reflection. And I heard that our nurses are heroes, and that every day they deliver the highest possible care, and people are experiencing excellent, patient-centered, compassionate care within NHS Orkney. And that came through loud and clear. I also heard that in the kind of specialist pathways that have a nurse that leads them, that there's a really excellent opportunity to learn from a patient-centered approach there around things like a single point of contact. So I also heard stories of people feeling lost in a system that has a lot of parts to it and feels very disconnected. So when somebody shared that they felt overwhelmed or lost, and the question came back, do you know where to go for help? And it was almost, the response was, there's too many places to go. I don't know how to filter it down. I also heard loud and clear that there are some challenges in accessing services, and that includes optometry and dentistry and physio specifically were mentioned at this session. And I know that the organization is already starting to take steps to address those long waits, recognizing all sorts of reasons why it's going to take a little bit longer than any of us would like. I also heard that our community sees and knows that NHS Orkney has a significant financial challenge ahead of it and wants to engage in a conversation. They see how we can make changes. They know where we might take a different tack around things like travel to other health boards for short appointments that certainly from the patients that were at that session felt like they could have been shorter or done remotely. And so I think as we think about reconnecting with people, I'm excited to be as creative as we can and ask them for advice. So we have an area clinical forum, and I actually think a patient forum as well, where we seek advice from our patients and service users, because there's some really great, exciting, and inspirational ideas out there. So that was what I learned. That report that I wrote, that again is really set by the Scottish Government what it needs to look like, but touches on some of the themes that I heard, is also available on our website. So if anybody wants to look at that, that's where that is. But again, I just want to give a big thank you to the people that facilitated the session, but also those people who took the time to come and talk with me as openly and honestly as they did. I enjoyed it immensely, even if some of the messages that I heard were challenging. Of course they were. So the next and final jigsaw piece before we get to the questions and answer session is a moment for me just to take us through a general presentation and kind of draw in some colleagues from the board to talk about either a reflective piece or the next step. So I'm going to do the thing where I share my screen, colleagues, and I hope that it all goes well. Okay. Can I just check that you guys can see that? Hold on. Let me just, yeah. Can everybody, I'm going to need somebody to shout at me because I have lost all my screens now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So this is what we've been doing. So in terms of our challenges and our responses to them, and on the whole, I'm going to turn this over to our executive colleagues, but that includes our fragile services, and also making sure that we are doing everything we can to smooth pathways of care for people that are either have been diagnosed with cancer or on a cancer diagnostic pathway. We have big challenges in our workforce, and I think Laura's going to talk a little bit more about that and expand on it when we talk about reconnecting with people. And something else that we are engaging in and looking at how we can do most effectively is act as a full anchor institution. And that means using our voice to collectively solve problems with other public sector organizations that impact all of us in how we access services. And the availability of housing and its accessibility is something that is a big challenge for us. So if we could take a little moment now to talk about fragile services, I'm going to ask Monique to please please say something to us about what's being done specifically around pain services, but also fragile services more generally.
Thanks, Megan. Happy to give an update on that. And to start with the fragile services in general, what we have done is we have taken a look and a review on all the services we have and which one are the most fragile and which one are the one we first need to address. Because as we said earlier, we can't address everything at the same time. One of those services is the pain service. And as probably people have seen, there been a communication out last week about it, which on behalf of NHS Orkney, we still apologize for all those patients who are waiting such a long time for getting to our pain service. Our pain service was a single-let service, which when there was a retirement of that specific person, there was kind of no pain service anymore. Of course, we tried to solve that with covering with locums, but as nationally everywhere, there is a shortage of staff and hence also a shortage of locum people. On the other hand, it was not the state-of-the-art way of treating and having the service. It was not the most effective way anymore. And with the latest evidence and the national guidance, there needs to be a multidisciplinary team. And what we mean with that is that you have a physiotherapist, a psychologist, an anaesthetist, a dietitian, and a lot of more people around it to help you to deal with the pain. Therefore, we had to look at two different ways. The first one is a reactive plan of change. What can we do now for the group of people now who are waiting now, which we have half a year to a year to do. And one of those things is creating a web page with some self-help on it as well. But the other part is to look at the patients who were on our waiting list at the moment as a returns and new patients, and have a look who can we help in which way. So there is a triage team or a vetting team, you can name it in different ways, who's going to have a look at the notes and going to say, okay, this patient might benefit the most from seeing that person, and the other patient might be more benefit by another one. The second thing is that we don't want to put a plaster again on a problem. We want to make a good fundamental change. And that fundamental change is going to take time. And we have kind of a 1 to 2 year idea of plan. And what we've done is that we created two focus groups, one focus group focusing on the communication and the communication in a broader way. So communication to the community, to the patients, to the staff in the hospital, but also the web page. and what can we do to help, and where can you go when you don't know where to go anymore. The other group is the design group, kind of like, how do we want the service? And that is something which we need to take the patients' ideas and views on as well. So we're going to involve, and we're going to create some sessions, and the Health Improvement Scotland is going to help us with that, to have some sessions with patients, with the community, with staff, for what is the best way to run this service and what is the best way that it suits Orkney and the community. We're also in conversation with other boards. How do they run their service? What can we take from those services back to Orkney? What works, what doesn't work? And what we said, this can't be done overnight, unfortunately. If we want to make it a sustainable, safe, effective model of care which suits Orkney, we need to look into staff, finance, and all other resources, and the implications of that, and how we do that. But we want to make it work, and we're really putting a lot of effort in it to get that service up and running. But in the meantime, do something for the patients now.
Thank you. I'm just making sure my mic is still on. With the presenter mode on, I lose Teams, so it's really challenging.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Monique. That is really helpful. I guess what I want to say is it's impossible to tackle the challenges that are facing the health service in the short term. And so a lot of the things that we are tackling are long-term challenges that are going to require a real strategic refresh. So when I think about our priorities now, I'm going to ask Laura, our chief executive, who's been in the job 7 months, Laura? 8 months now?
7 months.
7 months, to kind of take us through our priorities for the year ahead, and then who's doing what and what we can expect to see, or what might feel and look different. Thanks.
Thank you. So I will just run through these in very headline terms and perhaps just give 1 or 2 reflections or examples along the way. So firstly, we can really evidence that learning, and again, we're not quite there yet, but that's a big focus in the year ahead. Readiness for winter. So all health boards, including NHS Orkney, this year were asked by the Cabinet Secretary to learn from last winter and the experience of last winter, and make sure there were strengthened plans in place for this winter, but plans in place a lot earlier. So we've done that. And I think really importantly for us, we have made sure we're looking at this across the entire system. So this is not just about the Balfour. This is about what happens in the community and across social care and wider services. So really working together as a system and with different agencies here. And I think we go into winter with a much strengthened plan. That said, we know we have more work to do internally to really improve our focus on flow through and out of the Balfour, and there's more work to do there. And some, again, really simple things that we're focusing on in terms of better discharge planning, planning earlier in the day, so we have as many pre-noon discharges, for instance, as possible, so we can, as I say, really focus on flow and capacity and things within our gift from an NHS Orkney perspective. Big focus, unsurprisingly, on recruitment and retention. We talk a lot about recruitment, but actually we need to give as much, if not even more, focus on retention and really keeping the absolutely fabulous colleagues that we have already in the organisation. And we've talked about some of those things in terms of valuing staff, development and career opportunities, and making sure that pathway is much clearer for colleagues, better appraisals. And I think, again, we've got lots of work to do here. As we mentioned earlier, that's a big focus for groups like the Area Partnership Forum. But what we're also doing is really starting to invest in things like exit interviews for staff. So when we do have people leaving the organisation, we understand the reasons, the themes behind that, and we pick up on those things a lot sooner. In terms of leadership stability, as colleagues have said earlier today, a lot of churn and change at the top of the organisation, and what we are starting to do is really stabilise the organisation and making sure from an executive team and senior leadership team perspective, we have stability, have the right colleagues in place and are ready to lead the organisation. And as Megan said, I think there's a really exciting future here for the organisation. So that work is well underway and will continue into 2024. improving organisational culture. Again, we've touched on this, but at the heart of this is really making sure staff feel listened to and valued and supported. And this is an ongoing piece of work. There's a new rhythm of listening to staff inside the organisation, drop-in sessions, listening forums, briefing sessions for staff. We have completely changed how we communicate with our staff. So there's a regular heartbeat and drumbeat across the organisation, and staff know where they can come if they've got any questions, if they want to speak up, including about a safety concern. And we've got a really great structure around whistleblowing in the organisation. So I think we do some good work here, but moving to the next year, we'll put in place an organisational culture programme, which has kindness and compassionate leadership at centre, but also inclusion and fairness at its centre as well. So more to follow there. And then I know Mark will perhaps return and expand on this in a few moments, so I will not steal his thunder, but we cannot get away from the fact that we have a big financial challenge on our hands. We are adrift of where we should be from our financial plan perspective. We've put strengthened controls in place, including as recently as the last few weeks. But I just really want to return to my message earlier into the local community and to our patients that we are taking a really measured approach to this. This is about patient safety first, looking after our staff, but doing ever more to live within our means. And if we are really honest at the moment, we are not living within our means and we've got more work to do there, but we are balancing those three aspects. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I suppose maybe I'm gonna go a little bit off script and kind of come off the presentation now and stop sharing my screen. And one of the things certainly that I heard from patients in the community is around that financial challenge. And I guess I think this is a good opportunity to bring in our Director of Finance, Mark Doyle, to talk a little bit about both 22-23, but also what's different this year and the work that's going on for us to get to live within our means, as Laura said. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. In terms of just looking back at the 22-23 annual accounts process that we went through, NHS Orkney has 3 financial targets to deliver. That's the revenue resource limit, the capital resource limit, and we need to live within our cash target. And I can report that NHS Orkney delivered against all of those 3 targets last year. It had a small underspend on its revenue resource limit. It broke even on its capital resource limit and it delivered against its cash target. Now, there are a couple of things which are different from 22-23 to 23-24. So as I say, 22-23, we delivered against our targets. This year, 23-24, we are significantly adrift from where we need to be. Now, in the past, the Scottish Government has tended to provide finance at the end of the financial year to allow the board to deliver financial balance. However, this year we're hearing that any financial, any monies which are given financially from the Scottish Government will be given by way of a loan, and that money then needs to be paid back. And that again adds further to the challenges that the boards face. So there is an imperative then that we need to be working during this year and next year to start to cut our cloth accordingly and live within our means. Any decision that we make across the organisation in terms of cutting costs is in consultation with all the senior leaders across the organisation. And we're trying to ensure there's appropriate safeguards in place to ensure that vulnerable services are protected. And as Laura said at the start, this patient safety, quality of care and staff well-being is the key priority. But what we need to recognise is that we need to live within our means. And at the moment, we're falling way short of that. So as an organisation, we have put a lot of measures in place this year. During 22-23 and this year as well, we have a financial sustainability office. And that's where the organisation goes if it has ideas around delivering financial savings. In addition to that, we have a grip and control board, which scrutinises those schemes which have been put to the Financial Sustainability Office as a method of delivering financial savings across the organization. We have a senior leadership team, we have a corporate leadership team, and then we've got the Finance and Performance Committee and the board. And ultimately, we're working with the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government has created a financial delivery unit, which we have very, very early tapped into. As you're aware, all boards across Scotland, most boards across Scotland have got significant financial difficulties, and that is the reason why the financial delivery unit was created. So we've tapped into it very, very early, and we've had a number of reports coming out, and those reports have been passed on to the executive directors, and the executive directors will then conduct an in-depth review of spend in these particular areas. Now, you will be aware that we have a high level of agency and locum spend, and we're doing a deep dive in terms of that area. We're trying to create a sustainable medical model, which means that we will have substantive staff on the island, and we will be able to replace those locum and agency staff. So there is a lot of work going on across the organisation in terms of trying to deliver financial balance. It's not easy, and we have so much more work to do. Quite recently, we had a group which was created. It's through the senior leadership team. We had various workshops, and we created some transformational schemes. And those transformational schemes will be rolled out during 23-24 and 24-25 and beyond. There was a lot of traction there, and I heard Megan talking earlier on about getting the community involved, getting some other working groups set up, and that is hugely encouraging that the community want to be involved and they want to work with us as an organisation to deliver financial balance. So we are on course. This is the first year of a 5-year program where we're trying to get back into financial balance, and we've put all this stuff in place. There's a lot of rigor going on in the organisation, but as I say, I think it's very, very important to say that patient safety and quality of care is at the forefront of everything we do. I'll pause there, Megan. Happy to take any questions if there is.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really useful summary of the sort of financial landscape and what we're doing and how we're responding to our challenges. And I guess maybe it's important also to note that the Scottish Government itself is going through a recovery period and sort of looking at how it governs and health boards, and some of that financial architecture is also changing. And there are some things within the financial landscape, like inflation, that are nobody's got the levers to those. We just have to do the best we can with the taxpayer. I was going to say dollars, with the taxpayer investment that we receive. So thank you. So I'm going to go back to my presentation now. You'll be pleased to know we are rounding the home straight. And now and then we'll head to the question session. So I am going to try and share my screen again. Let's see how this goes. Okay, current slide. Great. And so now we're on to the reconnecting with our local community. And we've spoken a little bit about that. Laura, is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Yes, please. And I'll try and keep it relatively brief. So I guess in summary, over the last 7 months, I have had lots of conversations with our patients, partners, local community and staff to really understand what is it like to work here, what's it like to receive care here and use our services, and what is it like to work with us from a partner perspective. And as Megan said earlier, a couple of months ago, I published a report called Reconnecting with People, and very deliberately so, because what is really evident from the many conversations I have had and continue to have is that we have to find meaningful ways to reconnect with all of our people, staff, patients and our local community. And fundamentally, where we want to get to is to make sure every single improvement that comes out of this organisation or improvement to our services is driven by the voice of patients in our local community. And if we are really honest, we've got a long way to go, but that motivates us to do even better, and it's a real focus and priority for us. So just a couple of examples of some of the things we've done and changed and conversations we've had in recent months. And then I'll move on to just a very couple of updates of things we are going to look to in the months to come. So in terms of things we're doing some fabulous work in terms of listening to the lived experience of older adults with frailty to really co-design improvement in that space. We've had some fabulous listening sessions with our young LGBTQ community, and that work continues. We have subscribed to something called Care Opinion. Now, for those of you who don't know this, I call it the TripAdvisor of the NHS. So anyone who uses NHS services can go onto the Care Opinion website and comment, and the organisation, including NHS Orkney, will respond online, but respond through the lens of improvement. And we are starting to get some really great feedback through that route. And we now have patient stories at all of our public board meetings. In terms of where we will be focusing next, recognising we've still got lots to do in this area, we are just about to start engaging with our staff and our patients and local community on developing our new long-term corporate strategy. We are trying to work ever closer with our public sector partners and third sector partners to look at engagement, so we don't do the same engagement each, we join up wherever we can on that work. But also what we really want your feedback on moving forward is what does engagement look like for patients in the local community throughout the year, both for service specific engagement, but also topic specific engagement. And we've given some really careful thought to how we do that in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was really useful, and it is really important. And sometimes it's easy to forget all of the ways that things are moving forward and things are developing. So that has been really useful. So that is the end of the presentation and the sort of final bit of the jigsaw of the annual review that we've all come together. The picture has emerged. We got the corners in bit and then we filled in the middle. And I suppose now this is an opportunity for questions from people who are attending. But one of the things that I'm really pleased to say is that we received a few questions in advance from colleagues. So I'm just getting those up so I can read them verbatim from what was said and then turn them over to those colleagues that might answer. So just 1 second. It's taking me a minute, colleagues. And people, because I've got a lot on my screen, I mean. Not in that general sense. I have many screens open, which I should have had this open. Okay, so the first question that we had, actually, Emma, I apologize. I am discombobulated. Emma, do you have that question to hand? Let me, I'm sick of scrolling.
I have the questions, Megan. Yes, I can answer. No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first question that we had, I'll just read that out for you as it was sent in. Please, can you give an update on the state of our palliative care provision and what choices are there for folk to die at home in the Isles?
Thanks. So I'm going to turn it over now to Samantha, who's our Director of Nursing, Midwifery, Allied Health Professionals, and Acute Services, to provide an answer for this question.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, no, absolutely. So at the beginning of this year, we did a big piece of work following some community engagement and some work with patients and key users of the service, which led us to the rededication of the 4 beds within acute, within the Macmillan unit, to be able to provide symptom control and end-of-life support across all diseases and all pathways. So that work's going really, really well. The patients and their relatives who've been using those facilities have provided some really good feedback to our teams, and the nursing staff and the teams who work within those beds and that unit are really enjoying having that capability back to be able to facilitate care for the patients. We are still aware that we have a disconnect between the services that we provide on the mainland and those services that we're able to provide to our ferry-linked isles, for instance, or even wider out in the community, out of the acute setting. But we do have fabulous community nurses out there who are part of our district nursing team, who are very experienced in palliative care pathways, and our clinical nurse specialists, so those cancer nurse specialists who work within the team in the hospital, absolutely reach out to the clinical teams, whether that be our general practitioners or our nurse practitioners or those community nurses. And they will provide information and valued support when it comes to symptom control. And they also link in very closely with the team down at Roxburgh House in Aberdeen, which is our local hospice and advice centre. What we're doing over the next 3 to 6 months is we are looking to secure some finance, which I've been working with third partner agencies to do, to introduce a different speciality within Orkney. So that will be an advanced nurse practitioner who will work within symptom control. And that role will absolutely focus not only in acute, but also be that outreach person for all of our communities and across the Isles. So we really start to build up those pathways, and we start to understand actually how can we support everybody with whatever their wish happens to be. So if that is spending their last few days at home, how can we do that? How can we make sure we've got the right teams, and being able to get their symptom control balanced is what will give us the opportunity to do that. So I'm absolutely aware, hands up, we have got work to do around this, but it is absolutely part of our focus moving forwards, and we're aware that the community has asked about that before.
Thank you, Sam. I see that we've got a hand up, so I guess maybe I'd like to, Francis, that's what the name you're registered as, but I recognize that sometimes you're not always the person that it says. So Francis, do you have a question you'd like to ask now, please? I'm going to try and unmute your mic. Okay.
I might have done that myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I was the person that sent that question in and very concerned about it. And why I'm concerned about it more specifically is about this, is that you may be aware that Liam MacArthur is looking to introduce an assisted dying bill. And I feel that if the services aren't in place, the option for an assisted death will be a lot higher, and the take-up of that might be a lot higher if we haven't got good palliative care services in the Isles. I don't expect you to get into the politics of that, but that's just my concern. And I appreciate all that you're actually trying to do around palliative care.
So I guess what I'd like to say, Francis, is anytime a new piece of legislation comes through the Scottish Parliament, there's now a statutory obligation to undertake an island's impact assessment. And I would certainly use levers like that and use our local engagement, recognizing this is something we're really building around fundamental issues like that to ensure that we're really well sighted on how this might uniquely impact an island health board. And I think that that's a really great example of where an island experience and a resident and patient experience is so important in that kind of thing. So, yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So the second question was, and I'm going to read it out now. It says, in consideration of the options for persons experiencing mental health crisis and subject to detention under the Mental Health Act, has any focus been given to community-based alternatives? The question elaborates on a really specific type of community-based alternatives, but I guess I'd like to turn it now over to Stephen Brown, our Chief Officer, to talk about the really great work that's going on around mental health services, please.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And I suppose the simple answer to the question is yes. I think consideration is always given to any alternative that we can put in place to support people. Indeed, only those who are most in crisis and who genuinely require some support in a hospital setting for their mental health and well-being, it's only those who are at the very sharp end of that crisis. And I suppose just for people's awareness, in order to detain anyone under the Mental Health Act in Scotland, it requires the input of 2 professionals. That's what the legislation clearly says. It requires a psychiatrist and it requires a social worker who is also qualified as a mental health officer. Orkney is the only area in Scotland where in 100% of cases of people being detained to become an inpatient, we have had both of those professionals available and present for that detention. That doesn't happen everywhere else. That's about checks and balances and making sure that when we do have to detain someone, that, you know, that there are appropriate measures in place to ensure that that's the very last resort. So we always look for alternatives and how we can support individuals. I think the difficulty is, though, that we still find that too many people get to that real crisis point. And we are a long way shy of where we would like to be in terms of offering supports at every level when people are struggling with their mental health and well-being. I think we're seeing across the country levels of distress rising. Some of that's cost of living, some of it's as we've come through the pandemic. There's a whole number of pressures on people, and I think we're seeing that beginning to rise. And I've often said that some of the best mental health supports that are available to people, believe it or not, are not psychiatrists and psychologists and CPNs, community psychiatric nurses, although they all play a very important part. Some of the best mental health resources we have are our knit and natter clubs and our men's sheds and things that actually make a real difference to people on a day-to-day basis. Some of the supports we have on our islands, so here on the mainland of Orkney, we have the Blythe Trust, which provides excellent levels of support and drop-ins and support groups on our isles. We have invested with colleagues in the third sector in the islands wellbeing coordinators, also that providing that early support and advice to people about where to access that. I think finally, just to say that where we have the biggest gap still remains around our GP practices. We have been unable to invest in good psychiatric mental health support at a GP level. We had been given money from Scottish Government last year, which would have enabled us to invest £500,000 into our GP practices across the islands, that would have made a major difference. And that announcement, which had not only been given to Orkney but to various other boards, no sooner had that announcement been made and Scottish Government had to pause it because of their financial position. That will hopefully still come through because it is a pause, not a cessation of that funding. And if it does come through, I think that will give us real opportunities to support GP practices as well. So all of that's in the mix at the moment. And I think the other part of the question, as you'd rightly pointed out, Megan, was in relation to a model that's in place in Finland that actually has really good positive outcomes for people. And there are many elements of that, although we don't have that formally in place, there are many elements that we have in place here that are replicating what's happening in Finland as well. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I can see a hand going up as well. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really useful. And I suppose just trying to kind of tie this all together, the specific example that was used is something called open dialogue. And when we all received this question, I have to say all of us went off and Googled what open dialogue was, and we're really excited by what we read and what we learned. And I guess it would be through places like the Area Clinical Forum that Stephen Johnston described, that the conversations and explorations of models of care and different approaches can really be discussed by clinicians and chewed over in a really exciting way. So Duncan Ross, I see that your hand is up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, that was actually my question, and I have a vested interest because I'm actually going to be a qualified open dialogue practitioner, possibly the only one in Orkney, next month, and I have been supported by OHAC, Orkney Health and Care, in completing my training. What I noticed at one of the joint board meetings was that there was a closed discussion about how to manage the transition bed, which, for people who aren't aware, is where people are cared for when they're awaiting transfer to Cornhill. And the proposal was that a team, a psychiatric liaison team, staffed by community psychiatric nurses, would be able to provide the service so that the community mental health team would not be having to deploy the staff into that role rather than doing preventative work. What it what occurred to me was that there's two issues with that. One is it's still a medical model. It's not a social medical model of care for mental health. And secondly, we already have recruitment issues within our psychiatric nursing team. So it seems to me a case of let's do what we're doing, only better. Whereas I think this is the opportunity to explore other means of meeting that need. And the cost of a psychiatric bed, as you're well aware, is in the thousands of pounds per night. So there's a saving right there.
Thank you. All suggestions for savings plans are gratefully received, so please feel free. Stephen, I know that there's a lot of discussion going around that model of care and mental health services. Do you want to come back on that, please?
Yeah, just very quickly, and thanks very much, Duncan. And I recognise the open dialogue model, and great to hear that you're almost due to come through as a qualified practitioner. So happy to catch up on a discussion around it. I think the two things that really come through for me around the open dialogue model, and Duncan, you've touched on one of them, which I'll put to one side, about being much more of a social model. But I think the two things that come across is the supports that communities themselves can provide and wrap around people before it escalates to a point where people need the input of psychiatry, psychology, etc. And I think the second thing is that people get the support at an early stage. And I think if we're honest, across the country, not just in Orkney, for decades, NHS boards and trusts have prioritised physical health over mental health, to the point that the investment in mental health supports and services and has been to the point where people have, in those mental health teams, have told people who have been screaming out for help, come back when you're worse. And the reality is that people do, and by the time they come back, they need expensive pills, potions, inpatient services. So I think that model that you've described, Duncan, in terms of the open dialogue, is something that I think we've already got some building blocks in place, and happy to have a conversation with you beyond this meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. And I guess I'd like to also say that as part of my road show to talk about the annual review, I spoke with a group of third sector organizations, and many of them are involved in, and I'm going to talk about the sort of pathways of care. It's not the formal pathways, not the clinical pathways, but how people access support in Orkney. And just as Laura said, us understanding with that and connecting with those places is really something that's important for the year ahead, because our community and our sense of community is one of Orkney's, if not Orkney's greatest strength. And using that to best effect, I think, is something all of us recognize we can do better. Kirsty Jones, I see your hand is up.
Hi, yeah, I'm going to keep my camera off just because my internet signal is a bit dodgy, so I hope that's okay. I've got a question about the spiritual care service provision that I should have probably submitted before the deadline, but I didn't get around to, so I've brought it here. So since 2008, every board, regardless of its size, has been required to provide a 24/7 spiritual care service. In June of this year, the Scottish Government launched its new national framework for wellbeing and spiritual care that reiterated that requirement and also set out specified qualifications for spiritual care practitioners and for what services should be delivered within health and social care services. NHS Orkney is clear in its aims to be clinically led and managerial enabled, and we've heard lots of conversation tonight about listening to staff and acting on staff feedback. And yet, since the framework was published, NHS Orkney's spiritual care lead has been compelled to resign for reasons of professional integrity. Bearing in mind that chaplains have now been added into the provision of the Safe Staffing Act, with no spiritual care service in place, can the board please let us know how they plan to achieve delivery of a spiritual care service that meets the requirements of the national framework, as well as meeting NHS Orkney's values of care and compassion, dignity and respect, openness, honesty, responsibility and quality teamwork? And can you please also explain what risk now exists to patient and staff wellbeing following the resignation of our sole practitioner registered chaplain? Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose I'd like to first go to Sam. who can answer some of this, and then encourage any other member of the board who would like to reflect anything that they might have, please. So Sam?
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for the question, Kirsty. Yeah, so no, we are aware of the resignation of our single-handed chaplain, and we are aware of the government guidance that has come out that the NHS boards are required to follow. So there is an ongoing piece of work where we are looking at the spiritual care policy and what that means for NHS Orkney and how we have to adapt the guidance, as you say, and then looking at how we pull the business case together to look at how we can get the right amount of qualified people into the service and to work that up to make sure that we have got the right service, but that service that sits across not only the acute side, but also through our health and social care partnership. So how do we work this for a community as a whole, given some of the recommendations that are in the pathway? How do we look at how we pull all of those service avenues and things together? So that is a piece of work that my team are looking at the moment. We are aware there is a gap in service provision, and again, the team are looking at what that means for not only our inpatients, but also everybody else that reaches out for any spiritual and pastoral care at the moment. So it is something that the team is working on, something that they've been aware of for a couple of weeks, and we need to get traction on as we move forwards across this piece of time. But it's wider than just here in acute. The services of the bill and the provision sits across the whole of Orkney.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks very much. And I suppose maybe this might be something that we can revisit in some of our other communication and engagement channels as the sort of full, as that work progresses, which it sounds like it's well in hand. Thank you. Laura.
Thank you. And Kirsty, thank you for your questions and comments. I just really want to build on Sam's observations, really to let people know that I have personally spoken in the last couple of weeks to the chaplain concerned, both to listen and to learn from his experience, and there is most certainly learning there, and I just really want to reinforce that. Also to say chaplaincy and spiritual care is absolutely central to making sure our patients and staff get the best experience. So this is front and centre of what we're going to be doing moving forward, hugely important. And as Sam said, we now need to look at what we need moving forward in this service in the context of the new framework, but also really taking on board the listening and learning that we've done in the last couple of weeks, and that work is already well underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So this is the bit where I ask if there's any other questions or reflections that people would like to ask. Can I ask you, I think everybody's already done a good job, but can you please raise your hand? Because as has become apparent as the evening has unfolded, managing many screens is not my strength. So hands is great, chat box isn't. So does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? Francis.
I would just like to say thank you. This has been very enlightening, and I'd like to thank everybody's efforts for their presentations. One of the key things about communication is listening for what's not being said. And two things I haven't heard talked about this evening. One is children, and I saw it mentioned in the slide, but under the fragile services, but I just wondered about that. And the aisles were only mentioned once. And I do, I'd like to thank Stephen and Laura for coming out to Sanday. And I know that they've been to other aisles. But it's actually, where do we fit into that wider picture? But thank you mainly.
Thank you. Those are two very excellent questions. When it comes to children's services, I'm first going to go to Laura, and then potentially Stephen's going to come in. And then when we speak about the aisles, I'll go out even more.
Thank you, Francis. And it was really a delight to spend time with you and colleagues over the last few weeks. So thank you for being so welcoming to Stephen and I, first and foremost. I think in terms of engagement, again, I'm going to start with the aisles. I think we really want to ask people what they would like that engagement to look like, and we are completely receptive to how we keep in touch, how we build strong links with one another, and what listening looks like to you and engagement looks like, because it will differ from the aisles, but also from our community. and you know, it will be different for different people, and I think we need to recognise it's not going to be a one size fits all. So we genuinely welcome feedback around that, I think, is what we're saying this evening. We've got some ideas, but that doesn't make them the right ideas. It's going to be a mixed economy here of things we'd like to do, but also hearing feedback from you and others around what great engagement looks like for you. So please send your answers on a postcard to us and we'll give that some thought. I know we had a good conversation in the last couple of weeks, but let's build on that and see that as the start of the conversation. Megan, perhaps
it's very much co-production. It's very much co-production.
Absolutely. And I think there's some really great case studies, as we talked about, and exciting projects coming up that give us an opportunity to really test, does this work and what might that look like moving forward. Megan, if I could hand over to Stephen, perhaps, for Children's Services.
Children's Services, yes, thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. And I think we just need to be honest that some of our children's services have been really stretched over the piece, and you'll hear a common theme about the challenge of making appointments and bringing in people to fill gaps when others leave, which is why we stated right at the outset about retention being so important as well, because the more we can retain our staff, the fewer vacancies we have, and so that there has been a real challenge undoubtedly, and I think there's a focus not only within the NHS board but right across our community planning partnership on children's services, the need to make sure that we give our young people the best start we possibly can in life. And we know that there's been some gaps around our health visiting workforce. I'm delighted to say that we are heading towards being fully staffed again, having had a few gaps, so that's a bit of a success. We've also had some gaps around speech and language. The waiting lists are too long for our young people waiting to access speech and language therapy, albeit we are increasing the complement in terms of the establishment for that team, and hopefully we will continue to chip away at the recruitment piece. So I think it's just a recognition of that, Francis, but please be assured that there's a whole host of work in the background about how all partners from education and educational psychology, social work, health services work together to try and give young people the best start we can. And just very quickly on the IELTS piece as well, again, just to reiterate what Laura said, wanted to thank you and the rest of the team on Sandy and the Community Development Trust, etc., for the visit the other week. And we have spent just even this week time with the community in Pappy on Tuesday night. We spent a couple of hours with them talking about exactly the kinds of things we need to get into, not only their health and care needs, but indeed what is the economic development needs of that community in the longer term to ensure that those communities remain vibrant and sustainable. What are the transport link problems that we have, because it all is part and parcel, and it's a recognition of the role that the health board plays in all of this, but also that we cannot do it alone. So it was Pappy on Tuesday night, it was North Royalty last night, and we will continue to engage in those discussions to hopefully come up with solutions that will best fit the needs of those individual islands. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen and Laura. I suppose I'd also like to say that I had the privilege of attending the Westry conference in a kind of dual role as both the Westry residents, but I was also asked as the health board chair to talk about healthcare needs. And what I heard there was really loud and clear, if I'm honest, and that was maximizing people's time when they're in town. So looking at things that we can do to sort of coordinate access to services, because sometimes and as you get older, potentially you have a few more appointments that you're attending, and if we can join those up, that would be absolutely great. Discharge planning that actually acknowledges the boat timetables, which I think, if I'm honest, there was a time where NHS Orkney was pretty good at that, and I think we got a bit out of the way of it, even in scheduling appointments as well. And also that when something like the cancellation of a boat or a transport link means that an appointment isn't attended, that's recorded in a way that's sensitive to those things. And I think sometimes people feel a little bit penalize that somehow they didn't attend an appointment if the boat didn't go, and there's a concern that they might then end up at the bottom of the list the next time there's a clinic. So all of those things that just sort of acknowledge the lived experiences of people out here, and the very real constraints that they have in accessing services. And I think that's certainly something that we can work more towards every day. Duncan Ross again.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to raise the issue of creating a dementia-friendly environment within clinical settings. It's very important for persons with a cognitive disability, and especially dementia, to have an environment that isn't disabling. For instance, something that could be easily remedied is to have a dementia-friendly clock, calendar clock in each room, and also to have a physical presence at the entrance and exit points of each ward, because patients in distress naturally gravitate towards the exit. And if there isn't a person there to reassure them, then there's the risk, and the very real risk, that a patient may leave the ward and be at risk. And there has been examples of that actually happening over the last year. And it might be that it would be helpful to have a badging scheme, an audit from an external agency, to introduce that dementia-friendly standard within the hospital. And also the residential care settings, so that there is a continuity of standards.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to see that Gillian Skuse has raised her hand, because she actually chairs our dementia-friendly Orkney group. And so Gillian, I'm delighted that you put your hand up, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to call on you. So if I get you to come in, and then I'll get Sam to speak specifically about the building.
No, that's great. And thank you, Duncan, for raising that, because it gives me the opportunity to maybe just kind of talk about the way in which NHS Orkney, Orkney Islands Council, Orkney Health and Care, and ourselves, Age Scotland Orkney, with other third sector organisations, are all working together to try and support people with dementia specifically. So I think the biggest thing that I want to tell you is that we've just recently appointed an Admiral Nurse to work at Age Scotland Orkney. And this is a partnership approach between Dementia UK and Orkney Health and Care, Dementia Friendly Orkney, and ourselves, to be able to provide really high quality nursing to people, for example, that you're talking about within a hospital setting, or within a care home, or within our community. And this is the first Admiral Nurse in Scotland that's been employed by anybody. You know, the first one in Scotland. There's lots in England, first one in Scotland. So we recognise what you're talking about, Duncan, and we're working together to try and find a way of making it better. Now, for me, I find this is I think this is the first nurse we're going to have. I can see us having more in the future, because not only do these people work directly with the families and the people who are in hospital or in care homes, what we're doing is we're actually working to try and keep people out of hospital so they don't end up there. Because that's the key to this, is keeping people in their own homes where they want to be. Or if people have to come out of hospital, we're working with them to make sure there's the services and the people there to support them in their own home. So this is just kind of the beginning, I think, of this kind of journey in this part. It sounds quite slightly cliched, and I don't mean it to be, but that's exactly what it is. And we've got so many new things happening within dementia support and dementia-friendly communities that, you know, if you are working with people in your role, I'd be really happy to meet you, and so I can talk you through what's actually happening within our organisation at Age Scotland Orkney. So please feel free to contact me after this meeting. But thanks very much for allowing me to speak. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I suppose the dementia strategy that we have I consider it a real success, even though in the grand scheme of things, I've had very little to do with it. And that is because we've used the assets that exist in our community to best effect to serve our community well. So I'm going to turn over to Sam now, though, to speak about the sort of more technical and logistical aspects of your question, Duncan.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for the question, Duncan. And absolutely, as Gillian was referring to before, we're absolutely aware of all of those, problems that people with dementia can face coming into a setting. It's distressing enough for anybody to be admitted to a hospital or a care home setting, and then to have a completely unfamiliar environment around you just adds to that level of distress and for both the patient and their family and any other wider support networks that they have. So we are very careful in the acute setting that we really look at the application of the standards of looking after older people in acute hospitals, and we do take each and every patient into account as an individual. Yes, we can do more along those dementia-friendly strategies, and we're in the process of working through that with Gillian Coghill, who is our Alzheimer's nurse specialist, who very much has a focus on the dementia strategy for acute. So we're looking at, have we got all of those different things in place? So do we really equip everybody with their glasses, their hearing aids, the right pair of shoes and their walking aid? Have they got access to a clock and things that they can actually look at? Is somebody there to support them if they are determinedly wandering? Now, we would all determinedly wander if we had the chance to do it. So have we got members of staff allocated to them? Given the unfortunate cases of people leaving the hospital, who had dementia and stuff when I first started here at the beginning of the year, I've also drafted and brought in a missing persons policy. So I've worked very closely with Police Scotland about that. We've put all the national guidance in for missing persons. So that's now been rolled out across all of our acute areas, so that we absolutely have that focus on that potential. But there is some work for us to do, but the staff are buying into that, and what we're looking to do is have those champions around dementia care on every single ward. And at the moment we're doing some what we call T-trolley teaching. So that's just that, taking 5 minutes when the T-trolley happens to be around on the ward, and Gillian Coghill and her team and some partners from our physiotherapy service are doing T-trolley talks on delirium at the moment. So actually, are we addressing somebody's delirium? Where does that come from? And they do that with a variety of topics with our teams and stuff through the year. So please be assured it is something that we do take seriously, and we are doing our best to move that bit forwards and to make it part of our agenda at all times with every patient that comes in through the departments. Something else we're looking at doing is those patients with dementia, if they've got to come in for an outpatient's appointment, say, or they've got to come in to have a procedure done in theatres, then what we're looking at is facilitating visits beforehand, so that they and their relatives can come in, that they actually get to see the environment, and then it's a less stressful environment the next time when they actually have to come in to have that procedure done or to visit the outpatients department as well.
Thank you, Sam. Well, friends, colleagues, I believe that, Joanna. Hello, Joanna.
Hi, I've just noticed that there's a question from Anna Whelan in the chat, and I think it would be really good if we actually included that rather than reply to her afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Emma, do you feel like you could read that question out? I really don't want to open a chat box. Yep. I'm terrified it'll derail me completely.
Of course, Megan, no problem. So it's about picking up what was already said about missed appointments. There have been reports in the media recently about patients missing appointments south due to flight cancellations. How big a problem is this? And is there anything that community planning partners can do to help?
Obviously, the issues that have been highlighted recently about those connecting flights, when we became aware of just what an impact it was having, a cumulative impact it was having, the first people that Laura and I reached out to were Oliver Reed and James Stockin, to ensure that we were using our voices as those two anchor organizations. I do think that potentially transportation and connectivity to services is something that the community planning partnership can sink its teeth into. But I wonder, Laura, if you might have anything else you'd want to add to this.
Thank you. So, and thank you for the question. I think, firstly, we are to a degree sympathetic that with weather issues, staff issues and technical issues, delays inevitably happen from time to time. However, this is a deteriorating problem and something that is worsening that we are keeping a really close watch on. And as you will have seen in the local media over the last week or so, Megan and I have written to the Chief Exec at Loganair to raise our concerns. The disruption is real, and we've tried to quantify that as much as we can, including very publicly, but in a balanced way, in a measured way. The cancelled and delayed flights don't just impact on patients who are going to other centres for operations or appointments, and that then leads to inevitably operations being delayed and further delays to patients' care and treatment. It also disrupts clinical teams and staff who are travelling on island to work in the Balfour as well, and also disrupts some clinical supplies on island as well. So it's disruption both ways, if you like, not just those who are going for operations elsewhere. So we are alive to the problem. We have been quite vocal, and I think appropriately vocal, raising our concerns because of the disruption to patients. And what that only does is extend waiting times even longer, when we know the waiting times are already too long to start with. And we await a response from Loganair, but we are chasing that response, and we'll pull on the support of politicians and partners as we need to, and we're well on the case with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna, for flagging that. Well, that's it. We're done. I mean, when I say we're done, I mean, this is just the beginning. I know that sounds a little bit cliched, but I guess what I'd like to propose on the back of this, first of all, is to say thank you to everybody who did take the time to listen and come today and ask some really great questions. But also on the back of it, I'd like to write out to you with what we heard, and also potentially what those next steps might look like and how you can stay involved. And then my final plug is that our board meetings are public. The links are available on our website. And should you want to choose to spend your time doing this, I love it. It's my job, though. I would really love to see anybody who would like to come observe our board meetings, and they are public if that's something that you might take an interest in. So thank you again for your time this evening. Thank you to colleagues that answered questions honestly and openly and fulsomely, and to all of the people who have put in so much work into making tonight possible. And that's people like Emma West, our Corporate Services Manager and Board Secretary, Rachel Ratter, who is here as well, and also our comms team. So thank you to them as well. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully I'll see many of you next year.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.
Thank you.